How on earth can you have three different kinds of webinars? Isn't a webinar just a webinar? What's up, guys? Jason here, and welcome to episode 16 of Building an Online Business from Scratch. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the three different types of webinars and which ones might work best for you. So if you're just joining me, I'm going from A to Z on building an online consulting practice from scratch. That's what I've personally decided will be the quickest path to cash. And in this first season, if you will, I'm going over how to build a webinar sales funnel. So be sure to subscribe and check out the channel for other videos leading up to this one. So in today's episode, I'm going to talk about the three different types of webinars. So I've already gone over pretty much everything you need up until the point of actually writing the webinar. But before we dive into the webinar script that I promised in the last video, I realized we needed to do a couple of episodes kind of just going through my thought process and talking about all of the things you need to consider before you actually start writing your webinar. So in this episode, I'm going to talk about the three different types and the key and to producing the best kind of webinar and which type I think is the best. And then in future episodes, I'm going to talk about the logistics of recording and which webinar software to use. And then finally, we'll culminate in a really long video where I'm going to go through my entire webinar script. So make sure you subscribe to that because that's going to be super valuable in helping you write your own webinar. So today, what are the three different types? Now that I've talked about all the stuff we're going to do in the future, let's get down to business right now. The three different types, we have live, we have evergreen, or automated, and then we have hybrid. So we'll go through the definitions of each, then we'll go through the pros and cons, and in the end, I'll talk about which one I think is the best just across the board. So number one is live. Live is pretty straightforward, right? You show up to the webinar, you present it live, whether it's a video like this where you're talking straight into the camera, or preferably it's a screen capture where you're going through a PowerPoint presentation or a keynote presentation or Google Slides if you're doing that. Whatever the presentation is, that you're going through it, you're talking through everything live right then and there. People are asking you questions, you're able to engage with people. Automated is when you record a video. If you can think of YouTube videos, like any YouTube video would technically be automated or evergreen because I'm recording this for you and then it's going up on YouTube and you're playing it pretty much at your leisure whenever you want. And so you're not necessarily there live. You just put the webinar video up there and then the software automatically plays it at certain times depending on when people sign up. Next, we have the hybrid webinar. That's the third one. So that's a combination of the first two. And I'll get into that in the pros and cons. So we'll start with number one, live webinars. What are the pros? So number one is you're actually there live. So you're able to interact with the audience. And you have the ability, which is number two, to distinguish yourself from other individuals who are running webinars. Because as we'll get into in a second, most people actually don't host live webinars. And for good reason, but it's a great way to differentiate yourself. So what are the cons? Technical difficulties abound, right? So with a evergreen webinar, the software is pretty good at taking the video and just auto-playing it as it sees fit, as opposed to when you're live, you're trying to make sure your webcam's right, you're making sure your lighting is correct, you make sure your internet or your power doesn't, go out, or there's no lag with the webinar software, depending on what webinar software you're using, right? And so there can be some technical difficulties. And from what I've seen with live webinars, especially like, for example, a couple of weeks ago, I was just on the Neil Patel's 2017, Growth Hacking Summit. And these are guys who have been doing webinars for, I don't know, probably longer than all of us have even been thinking about starting our own businesses. And even they had issues with the software switching between their camera and the slideshows. And that's not to harp on any of them. That's just the reality of trying to do things live. It's never going to be as smooth as if it was automated or a YouTube video like this one. And then that leads me to number two, the number two con, and that is the polished nature of the content. When you're doing things live, they're going to be inevitably a lot more ums and ahs or oh, wait, or pauses as you're speaking, as opposed to a automated webinar where you're able to cut out all of those little things as you go through editing your webinar, making sure you have the most polished content ready. And that kind of leads me into another aspect of polished content, and that is unless you're really experienced with doing live webinars, and of course you gain experience by just doing them, there's really no other way, right? But unless you're really experienced, it's going to be hard for you to take advantage of that live aspect because you're going to be focused on delivering your content, and then you're going to pause and say, okay, what do you guys think about this? Or are people getting it? Or are you understanding it? And then you kind of wait for that, I don't know, 15 to 20-second delay of the responses coming in the chat, and then you have to physically try and read the chat. Now, when you're just starting out, that's not going to be a big deal because there's not going to be thousands of people on your webinar. But as you grow, there's a potential to where you're going to be overwhelmed with the number of responses you get. So it will be hard to pick out and actually interact with the audience and stay on top of the presentation that you have. And that just goes back to it not being as polished and it not being as smooth. Of course, there is a tremendous amount of value in being able to interact with people live on the webinar. Just realize that if you decide to do that, you're going to be giving up some of your polish. So there's live webinars. Next, we have automated webinars. Now, automated webinars are great for two reasons. It's always your best take. There's no technical issues. It's just nice and smooth. And that's pretty much why most people do it. If you wanted to add a third pro, I would say in terms of the number of softwares available out there, and I'll get into this in a future episode, it's a lot easier to set those up when you're running your ads because you don't have to constantly try and update your landing pages with the latest webinar date or registration, and you can offer more times, so you're more likely to get more leads showing up to your webinars. That being said, there are some real cons to this. Number one, there's no ability to actually interact with users. So if you actually wanted to show up and answer questions live or answer questions in the chat, you're not going to be able to. And number two con, this is probably biased, but I think we should just be honest with each other. An automated webinar is kind of fake because the whole premise of a webinar is there's some live aspect to it, right? The difference between a webinar and a VSL or video sales letter is one is you're showing up to an event and the other is just a video on a page. Now, sure, I'm dumbing them down a lot, but that's the the end of the day, that's the real distinction between the two. One is supposed to be an event where you're showing up with other people, you're showing up to see a presentation, and the other is just some cool video that you're watching, similar to this YouTube video. Like I would put YouTube videos on the VSL side because you watch it at your leisure. I don't tell you that I'm only going to be showing this video at 7 o'clock Pacific Standard Time on Tuesdays and Fridays or something like that. So I think that as people become more aware of the webinar softwares out there, and as they become more comfortable with the idea of webinars, and as more and more marketers go the extra mile to produce webinars, the value of automated webinars is definitely going to decrease. And of course, on your landing pages, you can't say that the webinar is live. I have seen people do this, but you're going to piss off a lot of your customers. And I say that nicely. There are definitely more expletives I could use for how people feel. But when you show up to a webinar, and if you've shown up to a webinar and this has happened to you, I can almost virtually guarantee you feel the same way I do. I show up to a webinar, I set aside a specific amount of time to say, okay, at 7 o'clock, I'm going to show up and I'm going to see your webinar because that's when you're showing it. If I make the commitment as a prospect to show up, you should make the commitment as the presenter to show up. Even if you're just answering comments in the background while the presentation is playing, there ought to be someone there to interact with. Otherwise, you're just forcing me to watch a VSL or some video presentation at a specific time, and I've just cut out this 2 or 3 hour block for no good reason other than to, just for some psychology things to force people to show up. So there's definitely a lot of power in automated webinars. They still work, but I don't think they're going to work for very much longer because I think people are catching on. And personally, when I show up to webinars now, I'm looking to see if it's live, if it's automated, or if it's hybrid. If it's live or hybrid, which I'll get to in a second, I'm okay. But if it's completely automated, I get pissed off because you're just showing me a video. You're just showing me a video. Why did I need to show up at 7 o'clock when, there are plenty of other people who have VSLs that I can watch on my own time? Now, obviously, from a marketing perspective, if I were to switch it as us business owners, there's a tremendous amount of value in getting people to commit to and focus on that time period. At the same time, we want to be thinking long-term in terms of our branding and how people who don't buy think about us, because most people aren't going to buy on the webinar. They're going to buy in the future. So we need to think about fostering that relationship now, even though they're not going to buy on this webinar, because we want them to be happy with us and buy in the future. We want them to go to other people's automated webinars and get upset, be like, oh, well, at least, Jason's webinar was somewhat hybrid and he was there answering questions as opposed to, this guy who just had an automated webinar and it was total BS. I could have just watched the replay anytime. So that's automated webinars. And the only other thing I want to say about those before I move on to more what I think is really important is, please, if you do automated webinars, please stop with the fake chats. Just please stop. That's all. It's just a humble request as a fellow business owner and marketer. So please stop with the chats, because you're not only hurting your business, you're hurting my business, and you're hurting everybody else's business who are doing webinars. Because prospects who come onto your webinar and see the fake chats and realize they're fake chats don't want to show up to my webinar, don't want to show up to other people's webinars, because they begin to assume that we're all doing that BS when we're not. So please just stop or don't do it. All right. Now we're ready for what I think is the best form of webinar, and that is hybrid webinars, because it gives you the both of best world. Both. It gives you both of best worlds. With hybrid webinars, you have the ability, depending on the software, and I'll get into this in a later video. I'm not going to talk about software here. Depending on the software, you have two options. Number one, you have the option of having a live component and a video component. Or number two, you have the option of just having a video go, and then you can do live chat in the background. Now, what I like about this particular model so much is that you get to have your polished presentation, but you don't get to lose the right, and I say this sincerely, you don't get to lose the right to say that you're running a webinar and the webinar is live. Because if you're not showing up to the webinar, personally, I don't think it's a webinar, but that's just me. So when you have a hybrid webinar, you get to pre-record that essential element, that teaching element, that rapport building, that pitch, and then you have two options. You can come on in the beginning and say, hey guys, what's up? I'm going to get into the presentation. I'll be answering questions as we go. Let's get started. Or you can just have the entire first part of the webinar pre-recorded. It can start automatically depending on the software, and then you come on in the end and answer questions. Or depending on your software, you might have the entire thing video and you're just in the background feverishly typing, answering everyone's questions as they come up. The advantage of this is you get to present all the information you want to present and you need to present, and then you don't have to worry about paying and training a virtual assistant to answer people's questions as the presentation goes on. You can have the presentation playing, you can answer questions, and then you can have a FAQ play at the end and keep answering questions, or you can come on live and then start answering questions live as well. So what are the cons? Well, there are two cons. Number one is you're not going to be interacting with people as your presentation goes. So that's definitely a con. Number two, you still run the risk of people getting pissed off. I don't think you'll have as many people upset as with an automated webinar where it's completely like, I'm not even here, I disabled the chat, you're just watching a VSL, as opposed to the chat's enabled and you can talk back and forth with me. Some people will still get mildly upset, but I think that's infinitely better than trying to do a live webinar and do 2 or 3 things at once, or just have a completely automated webinar where you're just throwing up a video and saying, yeah, go watch it, and then having people drop off and fail to be able to build that rapport and trust when you're just starting out with your audience. And that's it. That's what does it for the 3 different types of webinars. So you can do live, where you're wearing multiple hats, where you're interacting with people, and you're going to inevitably deal with some technical difficulties, but hopefully that is outweighed by the value you have in interacting with people as you go through your presentation. Definitely something you want to practice before you get on the webinar. Then you have automated webinars where you don't even show up. It's pretty much just a VSL that's set to play at a specific time. It works really well for business automation and marketing and lead generation automating purposes, but I think in the long run, it's going to hurt your brand and your ability to convert people later on down the road with additional products and services that you offer. Finally, we have hybrid webinars, which I think are the best out of all of them, where you pre-record the core elements of your presentation. So you run through your entire presentation, and then you show up at the end, you do a live Q&A, or if your software doesn't allow for that, then at least you're in the background answering questions as the presentation plays out, and you have a frequently asked questions part at the end of the presentation where you combine everything that you've heard from previous webinars and you just kind of add it on as time goes on. And that way you get this wonderful hybrid webinar where you're answering the most frequently asked questions at the end, even though you're not on, but you're sitting there in the background, typing away, answering people's questions. And I think from an ethical standpoint, you can still say that's live because you're showing up. But if you're not showing up, please don't call it live, and please stop doing the fake chats, whether you're doing it live or not. Thank you for watching. I hope you found that informative and actionable. If you got some value out of this video, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you're on YouTube, subscribe for more business building tactics and marketing strategies just like the ones we discussed in this video. Because like I said in the beginning, I'm going from A to Z, building an online business as a solopreneur from scratch, putting together a webinar sales funnel, and then showing you how I turn that into a full-time consulting practice online. So if you're interested in breaking out and having your own online income stream, this is definitely the place you want to be. Make sure you like and subscribe, and then leave a comment below if you know what type of webinar you think would work best for your business. And if you're not quite sure, go ahead and ask about it, and we'll figure out what type of webinar I think would work best for you and your situation, because I truly believe webinars are the future of lead generation. So webinars are here to stay. It's something we all need to be paying attention to and figuring out for our own businesses or starting and launching our own businesses. So until next week, keep building that business that you love, and I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.